Yo, what is up guys? It is Lost Griff. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a updated what school should you pick kind of type video. Now, I made one of these videos a really long time ago when I kind of had a high-pitched voice and, you know, all the whole 9 yards, but... What is up guys? It's Griff the Wiz here. Welcome back to another video. I'm going to be showing you guys the strengths and weaknesses of each school, which school you should pick if you're starting off, and stuff like that, you know. I'm coming back to kind of make a new updated version of this, as back then I only had one max wizard. I have currently 4 max wizards across the board. I'm pretty well ranked in PvP. I've played with a lot of different people who have the specific schools I don't have max and happen to have them maxed. I know a lot about how, you know, early game works and late game works, as I've played through multiple times and etc. So I do know quite a bit about Wizard101 PvP and PvE. So I wanted to kind of make a PvE video style today to kind of show you guys the best schools to pick right off the bat as a new beginner into Wizard101. Now I know a lot of people are either low level or haven't decided on their school yet, or are just kind of casual, and that's what kind of why I wanted to make this video, is because I feel like a lot of people would like some help and would like some videos geared towards, you know, getting new players into the game. And I think this is a great way to start with that kind of, you know, mindset. I'll be talking about my top 7 schools to pick as a beginner in Wizard101. Now, I will also be rating all of these schools across the board objectively, and how I think each of them rank against each other, and just overall their ease of access as a new player. Now, I hope you guys understand that this is just opinionated, but I try to put a little bit more facts and less opinions into my videos here, just to kind of not piss anybody off. Hopefully I can give you guys a non-biased standpoint here with this video, because I really do want to help some people understand what schools you should kind of stay away from, and maybe make your second school if you're really inspired by their abilities or their, you know, their role as a team player and etc. And if you are interested in that kind of thing, you know, of course you can always choose that school. If you want to challenge yourself, you can always choose the school. But remember that you'll have the most fun if you pick a school that is a little bit easier to get through the game with on your first run. And remember that Wizard101, although it is a kids game, is extremely hard and can be really punishing at certain times in the game. Notable worlds that, you know, kind of remind me of this, especially solo, is like Chrysalis and Azteca. Those worlds are so punishing to newer players into the game, because even at level 80s and 90s, you're still a little bit lost on certain fundamentals. So, you know, it's very important that, you know, you pick the right school and, you know, ultimately have a lot more success in your first run through the game. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys have any further questions, make sure you drop them in the comments below, and I'll try to respond as quick as I can. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy. Peace. I really do feel like Death is a really slept on school, because I feel like people don't realize how good their solo potential actually is. Not only do they have, honestly, the best solo AoE in the game, which is Scarecrow, and the reason why this is so good is because you literally can get all of your health back even with like 1 or 2 buffs, and hitting an entire team of mobs, you can easily get your full health back after a tough fight. Not only that, but you also have some really strong utility. You can save a lot of training points by not having to train Feint, which is probably the most popular form of the damage utility in terms of soloing. It really helps across the board to help you do more damage. You also get access to some really strong single hits, a really good overtime for certain bosses that you have to solo throughout the game. For example, the Storm Titan, not trying to spoil anything here. And to top it all off, you have 85% accuracy on all your spells, so luckily you don't have to worry about fizzling most of the time. You only have a 15% chance, and that pretty much gets made up for by Mount Olympus, which is the level 30 dungeon that a lot of people do. And so I do feel like Death just has a lot of, you know, strengths and pretty much no weaknesses. I would say their only weakness is through the first third of the game. I will say, if you don't have a pet like for example, the pet that gives the Colossifrog card, or Ship of Fools, which is a pay-to-win spell. Unfortunately, you do struggle a little bit with killing mobs. You will kind of struggle up until level 48 to get a lot of efficient kills on enemies, but don't forget you can also watch several videos people have made about how to get Deer Knight without crafting it, which is another AoE you can unlock. There's also some pets that give Deer Knight. There's just a lot of ways to get AoEs as a death that people sleep on, but I feel like in general, before Mushu, a lot of the fights and a lot of the combat is smooth sailing anyways, so not having an AoE early is not too big of a problem. It just slows you down a little bit, but overall I do feel like Death is a really strong school with great accuracy, great stats at the end game. They have, a lot of good gear sets that are good at all levels. They have, some really good healing potential. They have some good buffing potential, and they're really good with teams later on in the game because of their, ability to play hybridly, play offensively, heal, buff your teammates, and they're just really strong. So highly recommend you pick up Death as your first school because it just teaches you pretty much every single role to play. Even if you're playing solo, and it just kind of teaches you the game really well. So that's what I recommend you pick as your first school, but of course it's all personal preference. I give Death a decent 9 out of 10 just because of how long you have to wait for your AoE. Otherwise they would probably be a 10 out of 10. But otherwise I definitely do think they're the strongest school to pick as a beginner. With this listing, I do have some unfortunate news. I am not a max life wizard. In fact, I am not a high level max wizard. I had a level 60 life named Miranda, and I kind of had to delete her because of the whole new spell element farming strategy. More on that in another video. But basically I had to delete her, so probably gonna start fresh soon with this character, hopefully. Life is quite an easy school to solo with. You pretty much have no problem soloing. The only issue comes down to speed. Unfortunately, if you're looking for an offensive tempo on a solo school, Life is not your pick. Life is kind of a more patient way of playing the game. You honestly will pretty much never die as long as you know how to heal and how to play your cards right. You will pretty much never die on a Life Wizard. The problem is how fast will fights take and how long will they take. And honestly, they usually take pretty long. Fortunately though, you do have some really good accuracy, boasting a 90% accuracy on every single one of your spells, except for Shadow Pips of course. And honestly, that's pretty helpful as a beginner, because you don't really get accuracy until later on in the world. So as a beginner, not having to fizzle almost any of your hits is really nice and gives you a lot of security during the early worlds. Yo, I just wanted to stop the video real quick to make sure that you are subscribed to the Lost Griff channel. I upload almost every single day, and I try to stay as active as I can on my YouTube. So I'd appreciate if you guys dropped a sub, because only this amount of people are actually subscribed to my channel. So real quick, before this intermission ends, I'd appreciate if you guys go drop a sub real quick. Anyway, back to the video. So in one of the best changes that I just figured out about, believe it or not, they actually made it so Forest Lord, which is Life's AoE, is unlocked at level 48 instead of 58, which is such a big difference. It means that now, once you hit level 48, you will have a consistent and really strong AoE that really helps carry you through the rest of the game as a solo Life. Forest Lord is a 7-pip AoE that is super strong and quite flashy as well, and it honestly is really helpful and kind of changes up the game a lot for Life Wizards once you hit that level. So I do think that Death and Life are on the same, power in terms of how fast they can quest. But the problem for Life comes down to having to heal and not having that drain power, and also just overall not having as much hybrid stats, having a little bit more defensive stats most of the time, more focused on healing and resist and health. So while Life has some really strong pros, they also do have that con, which is in terms of speed. Just remember, on screen, if you see that Kookaburra pet, it's one of the best pets to pick up, kind of similar to Death's ability to pick up that 4-pip AoE pet. Make sure if you want to start a Life first, you find some way to get the Kookaburra pet. You can try to do some gold farming, maybe with a Max Wizard or something like that. But definitely make sure you get a Kookaburra pet because it'll infinitely speed up your process through Crocotopia and even up to Dragonspire. It's just a really helpful spell, and I highly recommend you pick it up. If you enjoy the healing archetype in MMO games and still want to be able to hit, this is definitely the school for you. I would give Life a decent to strong 8 out of 10 as it is. You know, still has some weaknesses, but honestly, it's still a great school to pick as a beginner. Ice is honestly one of the toughest schools for me to pick because I do feel like Ice is really hard to get into simply because of the low damage output, the amount of time you have to wait to get your offensive utility in the game, just and the amount of kind of just things you have to, you know, step over and deal with as a Ice Wizard. I do feel like as a level 100 Ice Wizard, I do feel like, you know, after a while it does become extremely easy. Your resistance is naturally so good as an Ice that you'll almost never see what it looks like to be defeated. It's kind of the similar way with Life, because Life does have an extremely high amount of health, but Ice literally just has so much shielding utility and just overall has so much potential as a school that I feel like most people will almost never die on it. And it kind of takes, it almost takes you to have to try to die in order to on an Ice. Now, there does create problems with this though, and the first one I'll mention is that you do absolutely no damage. Now, if you thought Life did no damage, I honestly think Ice is a whole different story. I know it feels like it's different, but since Frostshine has a stun utility on it, they lose even more damage on it, which means that even though you see this 5,000 damage right here, because of my crit rating and just my overall insane exalted stats, it doesn't mean that it's exactly super high damage. So overall, you'll kind of run into this problem where even though it is really easy to solo, it can be kind of sleeper sometimes. Same deal with Life as well. So even though they're both super strong schools, I do feel like they can be a little bit slow to quest sometimes and take a little bit of patience. But overall, I do feel like the more work you put in and the more time you put into playing Ice, you can kind of come up with a formula and be able to kill almost any mob without losing more than half of your HP in almost any fight. So I highly recommend, if you do like that tank school, if you do like even up the late game tanking with your team and taking all the hits and all that kind of stuff, and even after PvP, if you like playing tank and like playing around shields and those kind of hanging effects, then I highly recommend a school like Ice. It's super easy to play in the future. So if you get into PvE late in the game or get into PvP and start doing stuff like that, it's not too hard to play, so it's easier to pick up. I do feel like the accuracy on it isn't too bad either, so all their spells have 80%, which isn't too bad. It is around the same as Myth, which is kind of weird for a school like Ice, but overall they make up for it with their insane resistance and health. And I do feel like even though their accuracy isn't the best, they do get some pretty good spells to make up for it. They do get some insanely good utility. They do get some good overtimes. So overall, I recommend, if you like the tank archetype and want to stick with it, this is a great school to go in the direction of. So I will give this school probably a weak to decent 8 for its ability to tank, and overall, even though for its low damage and how long you have to wait to get your blades and offensive utility and stuff like that, you do still get it made up for with your insanely strong ability to tank through hits and overall just stay alive. On to the next school. Myth is a very interesting school because I feel like, honestly, Myth has a kind of bad reputation because despite their pretty solid accuracy, because Fire is 75 and Storm is 70 respectively in terms of accuracy, which is a big difference early on in the game. They also get a lot of flack for their minions being useless, you know, later in the game, which of course is self-explanatory. Of course, the minions aren't going to be, that you unlock at level 12 aren't going to be as good at level 130, but you know, I do feel like the minions are really nice early game. They help out a lot in making fights that shouldn't be winnable super winnable. They buffed a lot of the basic AI on some of these minions as well, so they're pretty strong just to use early on in the game. And if you love playing the role of having, you know, a minion by your side helping you out as you fight someone, I feel like this is the best school to do it with, because you have so many different options to choose from with a bunch of different AI, a bunch of different, you know, techniques that all of them use respectively, and I just feel like it's a really good school to start off with. So just again to go across the board, they have 80% accuracy. They have a little bit less damage than Fire and Storm, but they make up for that with their HP. They have around a little bit more HP than Fire does base. They do have some pretty hard-hitting spells, and their 7-pip AoE is, honestly, in my opinion, a little bit better than Fire Dragon, since the damage isn't deferred across the damage over time. So I do believe that Orthrus is actually a much stronger, you know, hit. But the only problem is Stormlord has a stun, so for 10 damage, you lose on Storm. You do get that extra AoE stun, which does probably make up for this 10 damage on Orthrus, but by definition, Orthrus is the strongest AoE for 7 pips, and honestly, it gives you the biggest bang for your buck as an AoE and as a spell in the game. So I highly recommend you pick up Myth. It's super slept on, and honestly, we need more Myths out here, bro. I feel like if you're trying to go the offensive route as a beginner, I feel like the best way to go is Myth, just because, you know, it's a super, you know, niche school. Not many people play it, so you'll, you know, feel a little bit different. You have good accuracy. You have these really good minions that you can use early in the game to help you out during certain bosses. You have, you know, a lot of utility that comes in clutch. You have stuns. You have all these different things. So overall, just I highly recommend Myth. Don't let people tell you it's bad. It's still a great school, and definitely going to be the next character at max. So hopefully this excited you about Myth if you're trying to go the offensive route a little bit more than you are hybrid, like I said with Death. In terms of Myth's soloing abilities, I would definitely feel safe giving it a strong 7 out of 10. It is easily the safest route to take if you're going the offensive route. And I do feel like, honestly, standalone definitely is easier to learn than Fire and Storm are. So highly recommend picking up Myth. Fire is interesting because I do feel like it is a very you know, not easy but also not hard school to solo with. You have a really solid early game AoE, you have a really solid late game AoE, and I do feel like there's a lot of really strong spells across Fire's board, but unfortunately they are kind of thrown off by their biggest strength is also their biggest weakness, which is how focused some of their spells are in terms of AoEs. So for example, Rain of Fire you might think is great, but unfortunately it's much better to just blade stack and then put up a bunch of different you know, buffs all at the same time across the board, and then just use that as a single, basically you just Fire Dragon kind of as like a killer, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, Fire Dragon has a pretty weak base damage because it defers its damage across, you know, the overtime. So that's pretty much a big problem for Fire, and unfortunately makes their hitting a little bit weaker. But they do make up for it with their great stats. Fire is, in my opinion, has some of the most busted stats in PvE across the board up until about, give or take, 130. So I think as a Fire, you get insane damage. As you can see, dude, this isn't even the best stats on Fire. I'm getting insane damage across the board. I'm getting some really good stats overall, and I feel like although you do only get 75 accuracy on all your spells, as you can see, except for a few exceptions like shadow spells, which are a type of spell you'll unlock much later into the game, I do feel like their accuracy is really lacking, and this kind of school gets to the point where accuracy is like, do I kind of want to deal with fizzling 1/4 of my spells early in the game? It kind of sucks. So, you know, it is kind of a trade-off. You do get a little bit more offensive capabilities than Myth does, but at the same time, you do have some struggles with accuracy at that point, and it doesn't really get fixed up until about at least level 30, which is really tough to work around. And you'll kind of notice it get even worse with the other offensive school I have placed later in the list. So overall, has some amazing damage output, insanely good but they do have some pretty low health. Their defensive capabilities are not very great. As you can see, the 171 damage compared to the 36 resistance, if that makes sense to any of you guys out there. So, you know, there is a lot of things that they could definitely get, which is health and resist, but overall, you can make some decent hybrid builds with fire to solo with that gave me some pretty good resist. I'm pretty sure I was actually able to get over 40 and I think around 90 damage, 100 damage on my fire during Waterworks, which is about the level 60 cutoff, which is pretty late in the game, all things considered. So, you know, I do feel like fire does have some great stats, does have some great qualities about it, as it is my favorite school, but you have to acknowledge its weaknesses, and that's that a lot of their overtime spells, which is pretty much their entire identity, are a little bit weaker and leave a lot more to be desired. I would say I would give fire about a strong 6 out of 10 as a soloing school, and I feel like you have a lot of, you know, room to grow as a fire. You can unlock a lot of different options, but overall, just a lot of cons, a lot of pros, and that's currently what I've decided for fire soloing capabilities. On to the next clip. I do feel like people kind of overrate Storm. Now, before you say anything, before you come out with pitchforks at me, I understand Storm has some amazing damage. I understand that they have some of the best single hits in the game, by far. I understand they do have a really strong AoE that's versatile across all levels. I get that. But, honestly, I don't recommend beginners try Storm. I feel like there's a huge amount of potential to die. I do feel like you almost get one shot sometimes, especially in the later worlds. I personally, especially before, you know, critical got buffed and all these different offensive changes happened that buffed and made the game a lot easier, I do feel like I was constantly struggling trying to solo quest on a Storm. There's so many bosses that are almost unbeatable because of it, as a Storm, you know, solo questing. And a lot of this has to do with its health. Its health and defenses are just a little bit too on the low side. Fire and Myth can kind of get away with their low HP, and their low resist at some times, but Storm is at the point where it's so on the other extreme of being Glass Cannon to where, like, look at that, I just took 1800 damage for like no pips. But like, even though you're able to one-shot people, and by far it's one of the, and I honestly think by far it's the quickest school to solo with, and you'll beat the game the quickest. I do feel like there is a lot of obstacles you have to deal with, such as accuracy, such as dying to mobs constantly because out of nowhere they'll just decide they're going to wild bolt you or Triton you for your entire HP. I do feel like it is a little bit, there's a lot of obstacles as a Storm, and although you do have that boastingly high damage, you do have that really solid accuracy. I do feel like you struggle a lot being such a glass offensive school as a Storm. And like I said, you'll notice that there's an amazing set of AoEs, there's an amazing set of utility, there's an amazing set of hits and potential for you to get your damage out as a Storm. But as of right now, I do feel like it's a little bit too hard to get into it. Just playing fully Glass Cannon as a beginner is usually not going to go right in almost any game, especially MMOs. So, yeah, I highly recommend, if you really do want that Glass Cannon type archetype, you can try Storm, but I do recommend, as if you're a beginner, I would leave it for your second or third school potentially, as I do feel like it is, you know, not too bad to play as a second or third school, because by that time you kind of know what you're doing. So I would personally give Storm maybe a weak 6. I do feel like it's a slightly harder version of what Fire is, but it is a little bit quicker in terms of solo questing than Fire is. The only problem is, again, waiting so long for the really strong AoE that'll carry you throughout the rest of the game. You know, I do feel like it has some strengths over Fire as well. It's just the cons can outweigh them at times, and you're a little bit too glass in order to solo most of the time. But remember that later in the game, you have some of the best team potential and some of the best, you know, abilities to work with a strong team near the end. So that's what I feel about Storm, and on to the next school. is a little bit of a controversial pick here, right? And it's one that I'm not too sure if most people will agree with, but I do personally feel like the School of Balance is one of, if not the hardest schools to solo on. Now, this take might be something that is, you know, taken by surprise by a lot of people. There are some people that believe that Balance is super good and has a lot of potential, but overall, it's just not easy for a beginner, man. I do feel like, even though Balance, I believe, is my second or third school I tried to max, I genuinely could not go past Exalted because of how much frustration it was to solo quest. It gets to the point where I almost feel like you almost cannot solo quest on this school without, you know, having a teammate or someone to go with, because yo, what's up guys, it's the Lost Griffin post. I realized after recording this, a lot of these videos had really high game audio. I didn't realize because I forgot to turn it up after. Really, what I was saying with Balance is I feel like their utility, their blades, their offensive tempo is really hard to build, especially whenever you're playing against just normal mobs, right? Because even though you can use multiple versions of Feint, obviously, just like with any school, you also have this problem where you can only use spells where to buff yourself that have a 25% blade on them instead of a 35, and you're limited on your options with that because you can't use the treasure card balance blades because they're really hard to find. And unfortunately, that leads to a problem where it's really hard to get a lot of balance blades to stack on yourself to use in situations where you're playing against like elite mobs, for example, and you need to get like 2 or 3 blades up, and oftentimes until you get a pet that has a balance blade, you usually struggle getting those buffs up. So unfortunately, you kind of deal with the problem when you're struggling with buffs. Not to mention, you also have to worry about, you know, the thing I mentioned earlier about Hydra and Chimera, having to rely on those to kill balance bosses takes forever, and often you die in the process of setting it up. And overall, you just struggle a lot in a lot of regards. Balance mobs are like a nightmare to kill unless you have really high Pierce. It's just, there's a lot of things you have to worry about as a Balance that honestly make the game a lot harder than it should be. Some people would argue that Storm is harder than Balance, and I honestly think you might be right. It's honestly a toss-up. The only difference for me is just the fact that dealing with a lot of these Balance mobs and a lot of the problems that Balance has really makes me want to warrant them a Balance Prism to unlock early in the game, because you don't get a Balance Prism until about 140, which is pretty much too late to even be able to use it for very long. And I just really do feel like they should have a Balance Prism that's trainable. It would just make the game so much easier. It would probably knock them up all the way to like literally like a strong 7. It's just, the problem for me is just I feel like a lot of people don't know how to properly set up strategies against balance bosses and balance mobs. And it just creates a big problem for new players because it's just something that you kind of have to jump through that hoop. And the only reason I'd recommend someone start on a Balance is if they have someone they're duo questing with, they want a PvP, or if they literally just want to challenge themselves. That's like the only 3 reasons I could ever see someone maxing a Balance first. So that's just how I view it overall. I feel like there's some strengths it has. Like it has some good health, it has some great stats, some good accuracy. That is all things that are very important. But yeah, Balance soloing definitely needs some love. I really do think Chaos should add Balance Prism simply because it's a little bit too hard for beginners to pick up Balance as a school right now and solo with it. I do feel like every single school in this game should at least be somewhat viable to solo with, because, you know, not everybody has like a full group of friends they can quest with every time. Yeah, I really do feel like this is the, you know, scariest school to solo on, but if you want to try it, then go ahead and try it, man. But yeah, that's about it for the video, guys. Thank you guys so much for sticking around if you were here this entire video. And if you honestly want to pick some of the schools that were lower ranked, I highly recommend you do it anyway. Wizard101 is a game about choices, and if you want to do something that sounds enjoyable, then go ahead and do it, man, honestly. In terms of, you know, support of the video, I'd really appreciate if you guys could drop a sub, and maybe press the bell so that whenever I upload, you get notified. I'd really appreciate that. If you guys want more videos like this, make sure you drop comments and stuff like that, you know, recommending other ideas, because I would love to make more videos like this and commentary style videos. I just love making this type of content. It's a lot of fun. This was a big project for me, and I really enjoyed every second of it. You know, I really do like putting my heart and soul into these videos instead of just throwing them out there, you know what I mean? So thank you guys so much for everything. Appreciate you guys watching this video, and hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Good luck in Wizard City or wherever you're starting. See ya.